Maybe we're done. That was fun. I could do that for about an hour.
Me too. And we might come back to it at the end.
Yeah, I hope so. It's always interesting because, like, when you're improvising, it's about listening, and it's about learning about a person.
Yeah.
And sort of being open, and not knowing where the other person's coming from, and trying to meet them in the middle.
Yeah.
It's lots of fun.
Yeah, it's a deep way of getting to know someone.
Yeah. So again, we just met. So we're going to kind of, let's see, we could start with talking about who are you? Like, we just did this thing together where we improvised.
Yeah.
And I know that that's an important thing for you in your work.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were talking last week, you mentioned that like when you went to X, you didn't have a job description. And we kind of bonded on that a little bit, because I used to work as, my first job out of college was as an information architect back in 1996. And there was this discussion, like, I wasn't hired as an information architect. It was like, what should I call myself? And it was like, the CEO and another founder of the company, we were like, how about information architect? And so, starting and not having a job description and kind of making it up as you go along. And so you said that you didn't have a job description.
Yeah.
And so maybe you could tell me what that was like for you, and also explain a little bit about what is X?
Yeah, I'd love to. So first of all, I'll get it out of the way early. The X we're talking about is not Twitter. We're talking about X, the moonshot factory, which is Alphabet. That's Google's parent company. It's their innovation lab. And things that you may have discovered that have come out of X are things like Waymo, self-driving cars, Wing, drone delivery, mineral computational agriculture, Google Brain, which is now behind so much of the AI products that are coming out of Google, like Translate and image recognition. And essentially, our job is to identify a problem in the world that's going to affect millions or billions of people, have an over-the-horizon idea about how we might solve it. It's probably going to sound a little bit crazy, a bit sci-fi, and then a glimpse of a technology promise that we think maybe in 5 or 10 years that if we were to make that true, could help us solve that problem. So we sit at the intersection of profit and purpose, and we're filtering every day through hundreds of ideas to look for the moonshot solutions to some of the hardest problems in the world. And we take them to a point where they've got the foundations of businesses, and then we graduate them outside of X, and they become standalone companies like Waymo. So I was excited anyway because of the things that X has graduated. But the bit that really caught me was actually the thesis of X, which is around the meta moonshot. So sadly, there are hundreds, thousands of problems in the world that are at scale: climate change, internet connectivity, and so on. And behind X, what we're really trying to do is not just have some land successfully, but actually systematize how we do it. So there is a meta moonshot, which is the repeatable creation of these businesses that can be good for the world and profitable. And that is the sort of parallel, I guess, between the music work and my life at X, and sort of why I was interested to take my own adventure there was, in order to do that, we have to have a systematic approach. It's the moonshot factory. So how do we commit to a process that allows us to find these gems amongst hundreds, thousands of ideas, and explore them in an intellectually honest way when lots of it is over the horizon? So yeah, I joined without a job description on the premise that I'd have some time to look around and work out where I might be helpful to X. And it's come down to how can I help systematize the creation of moonshots. So it's super easy to be audacious if you just throw loads of money at it. It's also super easy to be efficient if you read a bunch of business books. But actually, neither of those two things are going to yield something interesting unless you can find the intersection. So yeah, it's trying to retain the creativity, the audacity, the spirit that sits behind moonshot taking, but over its 13 years of existence, helping tune up those sort of dials of rigor and impact. And it's my job now. It's exciting.
So how would you say that this thing that we just did, which was kind of uncomfortable,
yeah,
sort of like unknowing, you don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
How would you say that this kind of improvisation, which relates to your work?
Yeah. So first of all, it's a practice. As you say, we could do this for an hour. I suspect we could actually do it daily for months.
Yeah.
And that by trusting that commitment of exploration over exploitation, we would get to places that we wouldn't be able to engineer any other way. So the sort of constant exploration, the commitment to a practice, the working with constraints, not going where you've been before, for me maps very closely to X, because we're asking people to come in with wild ideas that could be good for the world, and then intellectually, be dispassionate about whether they are actually proving out there being promise in that. So we'll talk a lot about learning per dollar in X.
Wait, say that again?
A learning per dollar rate.
Oh, okay.
So when we're investing in something, are we actually seeing the concrete evidence that is bringing that moonshot into fidelity or not? And how do we then make clear decisions about which ideas we pursue and which ones we don't? Which I think, if we were to pursue this over time, we would. Yeah,
like when you're improvising and it's on the fly, you have to be like, okay, should I go with this thread or should I throw that one away and do something new? And it's hard sometimes to make decisions about which. You just have to choose one.
Yeah, and to resist the normalcy, right? It's that I don't know how that was for the audience. I'm interested to hear later, but that probably, I guess for some people that might have seemed quite strange, a little bit uncomfortable, a bit odd, certainly doesn't sound good. And in the near term, a lot of what we do at X can look a bit crazy, a bit improbable, maybe a bit wasteful, but we're not really interested in the short-term efficiency. We're interested in playing the long game of exploration. And from that, we trust that we can find these potentials.
I have a lot of questions, not knowing. So about how many people are there in this group? Like,
so we tend not to disclose the size of X. We
is that a secret?
That's sort of, but enough people to.
Is it bigger than a bread box? Sorry? Bigger than a bread box?
We're not a bread box. No. Yeah, enough people to be able to explore widely and to create options without it hitting a point of bureaucracy. I'm a former civil servant, so I'm very allergic to the bureaucracy creep that could happen. So,
well, what I was curious about was that I was like imagining, like it's easy for two people to get together and to improvise and do something, but do you ever do things like that as a group, like where you all get together and do kind of exercises to be uncomfortable?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or do you leave it? Is each team kind of separate?
Yeah, there are different ways in which we do it. First of all, we're really serious about the how of X, and it's primarily how we assess how people are doing, not on the what. Because we believe that by practicing certain behaviors, dispassionate assessment, intellectual honesty, seeking 10x solutions, that the rest will take care of itself. We will find our moonshots if we commit to that practice. And we invest heavily in helping Xers essentially rid themselves of the social norms and the ego that can get in the way, where that's pretty hard to keep going home and saying, yeah, I explored an idea and it didn't work. And I'm doing another one and it didn't work. And I'm doing another one and it didn't work. And like, what am I doing with my life? But it's the practice, it's the commitment over time. Because if we're really shooting for 10x solutions and real moonshot solutions, almost everything we try should fail by design.
Well, what I was thinking is like for some of the people who are here, to like, what might be something to relate to it is like, you know how, like this is kind of scary. And if you're out there, like one thing that makes it scary for me is that like, I'm a professional musician and I don't like to sound unpolished or bad in front of an audience. And so it's like, it's kind of, you know, there's like the improvising that you do on your own. But then I actually like to improvise on stage as well because of that feeling of fear and being like on a knife edge that kind of can force me into decisions that I wouldn't do if I didn't have that kind of adrenaline. But at the same time, I know that I have the safety of my audience will always hopefully love me. And so what I was wondering about is how, as like a group or a company or as a leader, how do you make it safe for people to make mistakes, to do things that are kind of risky?
So it's a work in progress. Our joke is often that we're the best, we're the worst moonshot factory apart from all the other ones. So we are still like learning our way into this. And there are obvious things like when someone calls it on their project to say, we're not actually seeing the evidence that really gives us the belief that this is a thing worth pursuing, we will often reward that with healthy bonuses because we want people to feel that this is the right action to take. So a lot of it is, you know, the job is really to, how can you align all of the incentives to make sure that the lived experience matches up with that idea of when we say we want people to demonstrate intellectual honesty, that actually when they do that, there is a safety net behind it. You know, that's one of myriad ways that we would try and create the right sort of culture for pursuing that.
Yeah, because nobody wants to look dumb either. Like, you know, it has to be like safe to like do things that are wrong or whatever.
And it's celebrating the crazy ideas. It's being able to suspend a bit of disbelief. I mean, we have in X the design kitchen, which is where we do kind of rapid prototyping. And even now, a couple of years in, when I walk in, a lot of the stuff I see is like, you're doing what? Really? Is that, you know? And like playing the violin, you know, I'm very conscious of, you know, I can also play tunes, but you know, there's a tension here where we're taught to behave a certain way. There's a sort of social contract about what we're doing, and within X, we're asking people to rid themselves of that and look for the facts.
Yeah. Without saying whether it's bigger or smaller than a bread box, are you allowed to say, like, out of all the ideas that you have out there, what percentage of them you throw away?
Oh, that's, yeah. So I don't think we've ever quantified that. I would, finger in the air, say it must be north of 99% of everything we look at.
99%?
Yeah.
It's only 1% maybe make it to development.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
because
amazing.
we're not trying to just create businesses. And in fact, sometimes we'll find things that are good for the world, really promising, but they're not at a moonshot scale. And we'll help those businesses set up on the outside, like Malta and Dandelion, companies that might be familiar to folks here. Or if it's something where actually the technology is promising, but we can't see any business in that, we would open source that work so that someone else might be able to take it forward. Because what we're trying to do is create options for the future of Alphabet. So we're filtering rigorously.
Yeah.
And we've got to keep our eye on that prize of moonshot potential.
Going back to improvisation, do you have, is this something that you do on a regular basis with your violin still while you're working at X?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've only moved to, we moved to California January of last year. So
Oh, wow.
A recent resident of US. And it's been a bit of a whirlwind. So actually, one of the things that was really lovely about this was it was an excuse to get back to it, get back to practicing, get back to playing, and connect with a very important part of my identity, which helps me actually practice in X with the right mindsets and ways. So yeah, prior to moving, a continuous practice. Upon moving, a bit of a lapse, but you've put me back into it.
Well, I hope that, you work the violin into X somehow.
Yeah. Well, I am wondering about the potential for hosting improvisation workshops because, for anyone here, I guess we have both music lovers, musicians, people that haven't been in that space before. But if you imagine going home and taking your instrument or taking an object and committing for half an hour to exploring that as if you've never seen it before and testing its sonic potential and all the ways in which you could communicate or create sound with it, it's really hard. But it's actually calling on something about a beginner's mind, a sort of intellectual clarity of, what am I doing? What potential is in this? And the world is full of, which is a good thing, smart people working really hard. And X, I don't think will win at moonshot taking if it's just applying a work harder and be smarter than anyone else mentality. We have to find the sort of creative constraint around what we're doing to pop through to other solutions.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
Well, do we have time to play again? Or I don't know.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
I was thinking like there's like improvisation is so many different things to me. Like I use it to problem solve. Like when I'm working on a movie score or my own work and I'm stuck, I'll sometimes just like turn off the film or, turn off the piece I'm working on and I'll go and I'll improvise and try to come up with new stuff. But sometimes I can get stuck by my habits where, I mostly play tonal music. So do a lot of minor thirds.
Yeah.
A lot of really beautiful, rich cello tones.
Yeah.
And so there's like this balance between like thinking of how can I explore new things and how do I explore new things? And that's why I think it's great to have another person around.
Yeah.
So,
And it becomes a dialogue.
Yeah. So I have to listen to what you're doing. And then,
Anyway.
So
maybe we could play a bit and then maybe talk a bit some more.
Yeah, that was just a non-directional rant, but
yeah.
What does that make you feel like?
It's interesting. I mean, it's the first time we've played together. Improvisation can mean a ton of things to different people.
Yeah.
So no, I'm enjoying it. I wish we had days and weeks of playing. Maybe we can engineer that somehow.
Well, I can't remember what else we were supposed to do.
Should we talk about the people?
People?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we met last week.
Oh yeah.
We were talking about sort of what it takes to be able to do that, a particular mindset, and different musician types.
Yeah, it's true actually. Like if you're like not every musician can improvise, and when I started out writing layered cello music, initially I tried to hire a bunch of cellists. This is 20 years ago, because I knew exactly, well, kind of what I wanted to make, and I thought, okay, I'll hire these cellists, and then I wanted them to do a mixture of partially composed and partially improvised, and have them, vamp and stuff. And I found it really, really difficult to get classical musicians to do something that wasn't exactly written down.
Yeah.
And it was really, I was such a struggle to try to bring that out of them, that I found it easier to work with a computer.
Yeah.
Because I could tell the computer what to do.
It's antithetical, right? That's not how you've been trained.
Just to kind of, and in fact, last year I did a project with the Curtis Institute where I was trying to help these classical musicians be okay with uncertainty and to like cue each other in and stuff like that. And it is definitely a skill that I take for granted, like being that feeling of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And so is there, for you guys, how do you find that person?
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, it is antithetical. And for lots of people, this would seem maybe an inefficient way in the short term to spend their time. X can present like a technology company, but actually I think it's much healthier to think of it like a creativity company. And so there are attributes when we think about people that we're recruiting that maybe are good signals for whether they're going to thrive or be deeply frustrated by the things that we're asking for. So we often look for things like risk appetite. We look for things like nonlinear careers. We look for curiosity in the way that they show up, all signals of how they're going to engage with, quite a complicated setup in some ways. So
this is the one company job where a nonlinear career is a plus.
Absolutely. So I can give you two examples, lots of examples, but let me pull out two. So Adi runs our office in Israel. She's a general manager. In her 20s, she was a soap star on a local TV program for most of her 20s. She spent 15 years working for an EV company, and I think she has 3 degrees in law, geophysics, and earth sciences or something like that. And then she's run strategy for X for some time, and now she's gone off to Israel to set up a satellite office for us. That's pretty typical, and I don't mean that in terms of high achieving, which in lots of ways that sort of presents as high achieving, but more this kind of curiosity to explore different routes. Another person I can think of is Nick, who runs our operations team in X, and for a long time he was known as the global balloon concierge for our project Loon, which was how we were looking at stratospheric balloons to get internet to unconnected places. So he would fly all around the world, retrieve these balloons from places they perhaps shouldn't have landed. He's got friends in some unusual places, and he got very good at a capsule wardrobe of, a suit for the diplomatic moments and, khakis for the not so great moments. But he came to that through having worked in search and rescue, through trying to get into a medical career and not being successful in doing that, and being sort of around emergency response situations for a long time. And in his spare time, he's a pilot. So this is sort of pretty typical where, a CV can only tell you so much, but actually exploring beyond the edges of, I spent 10 years here and 5 years here and whatever. What are the other things that person is investing in, which it sort of illustrates their creativity, their curiosity, their risk-taking, so that when they come in and we're filtering all of these ideas and saying, not that one, that one, that one, not that one, not that one, that one's interesting, that we can do that with some sense of precision and, we're not just run by our conviction that something is a solution to a problem.
So you didn't have a job description when you started, but did you apply for a job that had a different description, or like how did you end up there?
Before joining X, I was a civil servant in the UK.
Okay.
And I had been running gov.uk, which is the UK government's information and services online. And I'd had the pain and privilege of doing that through Brexit and COVID. Oh. Incredible job, extremely all-consuming. And when I was getting to the end of that phase, I was, this sort of operationalizing the response to COVID was starting to normalize. I was realizing that either something like the aliens were going to land and it was going to be more of this like living on a string adrenaline, or it was going to revert to type and I would probably cause trouble because I'm not going to be great if it's not some sort of a learning environment that we're in with something of importance, mission. And so I was actually thinking of going back to school. I'd always wanted to do a PhD. I'd not done it. I was sort of fishing around, wondering what might be next. And a friend, a mentor of mine said, why don't you go and talk to the people that live in the future and just see what they say about like what's worth studying and where you should be looking. And so
talk to the people who live in the future.
Live in the future, yes, yeah. So I met someone who worked at X at the time, and she then introduced me to Astro, who is our CEO. And, when he started talking about the time machine project, I did actually have to pass for a moment, like the actual time machine project, or are you just using that as like a sort of joke example? And, even today, I'm not always totally sure which side he is on that. Because we do want those like sci-fi sounding solutions that, God, that would be amazing if that was real. So, yeah.
Or terrible.
Or terrible, yeah. Depends which time you go to.
Yeah. I have a middle schooler, and so he's always talking about like the time paradox in movies and which way you choose. So I think it might be terrible.
Yeah.
You may not be able to answer this first question, so I have a second one for you, and no worries. But my first question is, can you talk about the big issues that really animate the work of your team now? The most important problems you'd like to be able to solve.
Yeah. I don't think it's something that's unique to X, actually. It's all about the people. So actually, a lot of what is consuming us is how we manage our psychology in that environment, where we are filtering through things all the time, discarding things that we're really excited about. How do you manage your psychology so that you can keep coming in with a fresh perspective, beginner's mind, intellectual honesty? And we spend a lot of time coaching and training our Xers in ways and methods to be able to do that. So I would say that is a big chunk of what consumes us. I think the other is, how to feel safe within that environment where we are an innovation lab. It is long-term horizons. It can be hard to see in the near term the sort of proof points. And when you're in that environment, it's very easy to forget how game-changing some of the things are that are coming out. That, kids today are in some places saying, like, I don't need to learn to drive. Like, why would I do that? I can just take an autonomous vehicle at some point. I mean, 5 years ago, we would have thought that was crazy. And now that future is starting to come in. And when you're living it every day, it's hard to sort of remember that sort of level of impact. Or we've talked a lot about regenerative agriculture already today. If you subscribe to the view that we have a limited number of harvests left, then what if you can actually move away from spray cropping and sort of mass agriculture and get to super precision treatment of crops coming out? But in your day-to-day, when you're sort of slogging through the ideas and your experiment hasn't worked and you've got to set up another one that's going to, this sort of connection of where it goes, it can be really hard to sort of keep that front and center in what you're doing. So I think for a lot of type A's, which X definitely attracts, That's really a challenge because we're taught to sort of grow up in a, when are you going to be the CEO of your company? And we're not providing a linear route to that. We're not really particularly interested in what level people are. We don't have normal job titles. We're not sort of setting up for status. And that's actually quite hard for people to navigate. It's a lot of ambiguity in that. And so we're often helping people, navigate that environment. Is that the sort of essence of what you were exploring?
I love hearing you talk, and that was fascinating.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody over here?
How many projects are your team producing at any given time, and is each X member responsible for more than one at a time, or are they completely focused on a single problem that they're trying to solve?
Yeah. So you can think of X like a big funnel, where what we're trying to do is fill the very top of it with as many ideas as possible, of diverse a nature as possible, and then we're basically streamlining down to a kind of select few at our sort of most mature stages, which still is pretty early in the creation process to the outside world. And it depends. So we don't have kind of uniform structures a lot of the time. So some people are on multiple projects. We have some central teams, like a central team that will support on AI and machine learning practices, and they might be on 5-6 projects that they're helping. And then some people that pursue one, and it will come through. But like their careers, routes in X tend to not be very linear. And so we're always encouraging people to actually have high connective tissue with the factory as a whole, so that they actually have some of that security of, if this thing didn't actually show the promise, I'm kind of already interested in these 3 other things here. But, as a general premise, by the time something is reaching its point of maturity for X, we are looking to have the foundations in of, a strong leader, a great team, product capability, et cetera, so that when they graduate, it's not such a hard hit with the real world on the other side.
So a lot of what I'm hearing is you are practicing on the daily your ability to expand imagination.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you have any daily practices for your own creating spaciousness for imagination.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm a recent dog owner, and he's a very willful greyhound. And it's a real connection for me with play, because as we get older, I don't have kids, right? We sort of forget to play. We forget to have fun, to do things without having an end goal. And my greyhound will decide it's playtime. And either you catch that moment, which lasts about all of 3 minutes, or it's gone. So the kind of spontaneity and commitment to play is, I'm finding increasingly, is an amazing way of actually remembering the levity of what I'm doing. Actually getting outside of all of the meetings. So I've just tried, and I'm interested if anyone else is doing this here, just moving to a just-in-time schedule. So I've tried to stand down as much as possible of the kind of back-to-back nature of my day, so that I can actually get out in the factory, spend time in the design kitchen, go and see what a project is doing. Because actually my own creativity, my own inspiration goes up when I can get out of, for all of us probably, a kind of back-to-back schedule. That does not elicit the kind of mind-bending, what about moments, And so if I'm saying to Xers, we've got to explore the what-if solutions amongst all of this, I need to also practice it. So being out in the factory really with the projects is super energizing. And then beyond that, moving from London, which has many great qualities, to California, incredible wildlife. And we had talk about nature bathing earlier, actually getting outside and being inspired by such a beautiful state is an incredible way of having perspective. And again, perspective shifting, super important. Maybe it's not that solution, maybe it's this solution. What if we looked at it this way? Again, if you just sit in an office back to back, not going to get there.
Talk a little bit about how you decide to run projects. I mean, it seems like that's a really important part of things. And does that come from the bottom up? Is it top down? Is it collaborative? Do teams self-select and say, this just isn't working, let's end it?
Yeah.
How do people feel about it?
That's a great question.
Yeah. It's complicated. Sometimes we have super clear data that is sort of unavoidable, and the team will come to be able to conclude on that decision themselves. And our preference is always that the team should be able to lead a shutdown, even if that means it runs on a little bit longer. It might be sort of obvious from the outside. Actually allowing the team to go through the emotional process of seeing the data, realizing what that means, coming to sort of own it themselves is always going to be better than someone else outside the team saying, it's time to stop. Of course, we want to be efficient and effective, so there is always we have to catch things if we can't get to that moment. But essentially, it's back to the learning per dollar moment. We have a
like for example, Pixar had these sort of themed, roundtables where they would talk, works in progress and get really honest feedback.
Yeah. We do have different mechanisms, both similar to Ed Catmull is an advisor to X, which we're very fortunate to have. And I think we've learned some of those practices about how can we have group meetings. If you think about moving through a pipeline, can we do sort of round tables to look at what's there, to test the evidence, to pressure test? So yes, those mechanisms are in there. And we are exploring at the moment how we can more formally sort of pressure test some of the ideas as they're coming through, because we do want to bake things a little bit longer, have those foundations be a bit stronger. And again, when you're in the depths of it and you're super passionate about it, sometimes you need that outside perspective, but all with the intention of being super supportive to the team so that they can make the right decisions. But again, like the question about whether people are on one project or a few, we tend not to be super formulaic about that structure, which is a wrestle for me. Like, how much process is going to be effective versus kill the creativity and the audacity and potential of these great minds that I get to work with.
How do the teams communicate with each other? Do you find, is it in person a lot of the time? Is it like this at round tables? Is it out on a block? Do you see it like evolve? Each thing evolves differently, or?
Yeah.
I'm curious about how they communicate with each other.
So we committed to being a majority in-person culture when that was definitely not cool at the end of COVID. And I think that's actually paid dividends in lots of ways, because we've not had an expectation of not being in the factory. So that helps. And yes, we're still on a kind of learning curve of how we get back into that new groove post-COVID of being together. But it is both lots of open plan working spaces, meeting rooms, workshop spaces, things like the design kitchen where people can go in and prototype and you bump into lots of different people. We have series of things like tech talks and company all hands, things that I don't think would be unusual in lots of other places. So it is a mixture, and walking meetings, I would say, are a big thing, although I understand that's fairly normal anyway in Silicon Valley. But we have a nice walking track around our building, and quite often you'll go out for a walk and so is everybody else. Because it's a different way. It's less confrontational. You can talk about different things. You're outside. That's a different side of your brain. So being able to explore hard things is sometimes nice to be doing it when you're walking. Yeah.
Sounds like you have a team that works with an idea and brings it through iterations. Does the team stick with it till the end and leave X? Or I assume you there's a decision point where it's like, okay, this is going to work, and then you put it into the machine and operationalize it.
Yeah.
How does that work, and how do you decide when something's valid enough to kind of operationalize it and move it to the teams that just make shit happen kind of thing?
Yeah, so teams do tend to change quite a lot, and most things will start with one person, a one-person exploration. And it's definitely not impossible that you might be the single-person investigator on an idea, and you might end up being the CEO of another bet. That in itself is an extraordinary learning curve if you come to it without having had prior experience. And often the person who's great at doing the one-person investigation might not be the person who's great at managing a 300-person company. So teams do tend to evolve, and quite often we might have something like the founder behind the idea might become the CTO, and someone else will come in to be the CEO of that project. But it's sort of stage appropriate needs. So that's part of what we're evaluating is, has the person taken it as far as they can, and now we need someone else to come in and help supplement it. And yeah, we do have people that have sort of followed the whole trajectory of a project, but yeah, quite a lot of change. And actually, again, often the Xer will self-nominate on that. Like, I want to get to the point where I've technically de-risked, and then I need someone else to come in and think about what's the product strategy here.
You had a question as well, and somebody over there.
I really appreciate hearing about all of the culture in the workplace, about how you create sort of moonshot environments. And I'm noticing that we began with music improvisation, and Zoe Keating is a master musician and award-winning. And I feel really honored to be able to, in this space, be able to listen. And so I just want to shoot a question to Zoe.
Please.
Because I think art is often used as like the platform to then begin to talk about things that are more economical or considered more profitable. And so I just want to ask Zoe, like, what is something in your world musically that is a moonshot problem that you're solving, either alone or in collaboration with other people? Because here we have an office culture that's deeply collaborative, and yet you have also mentioned that you work alone often, and that you encountered a moment where you chose to work with loops and a computer early on 20 years ago, and that album is amazing. So like you've also problem solved, but I think artists are often asked to work actually alone and within the realm of the ego in order to survive. So it's just this really interesting contradiction that's on stage. I just want to honor that. So Zoe, what is your moonshot?
My moonshot, well, that sounds like a whole other session. But I would say, like you were saying, musicians often work alone, and also musicians often feel, and other artists often feel, like they're off to the side. And I think my moonshot would be to just incorporate that more into our daily lives. Like, like I love being included in this. Musicians are, and other artists are sort of well-rounded. And so like finding ways to kind of not sideline the arts, not to have STEM and then the arts over here. Make it STEAM. Yeah, STEAM, not STEM. That might be my moonshot. Just sort of incorporate it in everything, because they're like relevant to everything. So yeah.
I have a question that follows on that. It's directed at you first.
Sure.
Also about listening, and how when you're playing, you can feel how you're both listening. And I'd love to hear more about what's going on inside, what you're listening for, and then how that spills out into the work life or your other life.
I would say, if I could address that first, like one of the most valuable things about improvisation is being able to communicate with someone else in a nonverbal way. Like we have these sort of constructs and constraints about how we interact. Like we evaluate the way we look and our mannerisms and our accents. And music is this whole other way to communicate. And I really value that. And I really enjoy listening to what another person has to say. And it's a chance for me to turn off the analytical part of my brain and to just connect. And to connect with like my inner self and with the other person. And so I think that's, there's all these other things we talked about that improvisation can do. But for me, that's like, music in general is just this way to communicate on another level with people. So, yeah.
I would add to that, I suppose it's, are we listening and formulating a response simultaneously, or are we listening wholly and then responding? And it's one of the things that improvisation has really helped me with. And it's a practice in a fast-moving environment where you're trying to make decisions, you need to make decisions all the time. How do you slow the mind and listen and then respond? And we've all had that experience, right? Of having a conversation with someone where they're just waiting to give you the answer back. And that's not actually what you're first expressing. So yeah, I think there's often quite a lot of space in free improvisation, I've noticed. Not always, but often.
Yeah, which is good. Space is music too.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate it.